The Battle of Berlin, the last climactic clash between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union for mastery of Hitler's capital, would witness an extraordinary aerial mission that stood out among the many desperate Luftwaffe operations during the battle because the pilot that flew it was a woman. The Luftwaffe did not have a tradition of female pilots. Indeed, although hundreds of thousands of German women served in uniform during World War II, they were generally relegated to supporting or auxiliary roles, such as nurses, searchlight operators, and communications clerks in the Army, Air Force, and Navy. Few women were seen on the front lines or in combat, as the Nazis had traditional views on women's roles and didn't think such duties befitting of German womanhood. In this regard, Germany was very different from the Soviet Union, where women saw plenty of combat as anti-aircraft gunners, tank drivers, snipers, and bomber and fighter pilots. In the American and British armed forces, women were kept out of combat, but special aerial ferry services were formed, where qualified female pilots could find jobs ferrying new aircraft to frontline squadrons. This could be dangerous work if they encountered German aircraft. Reluctantly, the Luftwaffe had permitted a few women pilots to undertake similar duties towards the end of the war, acting as ferry pilots. This group of flyers included some famous female test pilots, chief among them Hanna Reitsch. One other was Beate Uhse. Born in 1919, she had worked as a stunt pilot in pre-war movies and had joined the Luftwaffe in 1943, being made a Hauptmann or captain. Her husband was night fighter pilot Hauptmann Hans-Jürgen Uhse, who was killed in a mid-air collision in 1944. Working as a ferry pilot, Uhse flew the Messerschmitt 109, the Focke-Wulf 190, the Junkers Ju-87 Stuka, and the Messerschmitt 110. Unlike British and American ferry pilots, she always flew fully armed in case of an encounter with a hostile aircraft. Towards the end of the war, Uhse was undertaking training to qualify on the new Messerschmitt 262 jet fighter. As a stunt pilot, she generally flew below treetop height, as she put it, as an added protection from roving enemy fighters. On the 8th of April 1945, Germany had suffered its first loss of a female pilot in action when Melitta, Countess von Stauffenberg, a relation by marriage of the Count von Stauffenberg who had tried to kill Hitler with a bomb at the Wolf's Lair on the 20th of July 1944, was killed when flying a Booker Bu-181 training aircraft. She encountered an American P-51 Mustang. Following the July plot, many members of her family had been arrested and/or executed. Her husband was one such, detained and held at a special camp inside Buchenwald concentration camp. Melitta was a famous female pilot who had been awarded the Iron Cross Second Class and the Gold Front Flying Clasp for bombers with diamonds from Hermann Göring, but privately felt a loyalty to Germany but not to the Nazi regime. She managed to stay in contact with her family, who as high-profile hostages were fairly well treated at Buchenwald, and she flew several times to the camp to check on them. On the 4th of April 1945, she had flown to Buchenwald and discovered to her horror that the special enclosure was empty. The high-profile prisoners, including her husband, had been moved to Regensburg. Following her husband's trail, on the 8th of April, she and her male co-pilot had taken off for Regensburg, but were attacked by a P-51 Mustang that was searching for trains to strafe. Though wounded, von Stauffenberg managed to crash-land the plane in a field. She died 2 hours later in hospital. Her husband survived the war. Beate Uhse also decided to launch a rescue mission on her own accord, similar to that of von Stauffenberg's. By the 20th of April 1945, Soviet forces had reached Berlin's eastern suburbs. Uhse was deeply worried as her infant son and his nanny were still at her house in Berlin. Soviet forces had begun to encircle the city. Time was running out. Uhse was serving as a pilot in Ferry Squadron 1. Her unit was based at Barth, 280 kilometers north of Berlin on the Baltic coast. Desperate to get into Berlin and rescue her 2-year-old son and his nanny, who were at her house at Rangsdorf, she took one of the squadron's Arado aircraft and flew into Gatow Airbase inside Berlin. Arriving at Gatow on the 21st of April 1945, the situation in Berlin was dire, with heavy street fighting as Soviet tank columns fought their way towards the government quarter, where Hitler still tried to direct the battle from his bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery garden. She commandeered a field car and a driver and drove through the ravaged city to a house at Rangsdorf, being reunited with her son. Uhse returned to the airbase the following day, 22nd of April, to discover to her horror that the Arado 66 had been destroyed by enemy fire. Searching around for some way out of Berlin, she ran into a Luftwaffe air mechanic whom she knew, and he told her that there was a 5-seat Siebel Fh 104 communications plane that belonged to some general in one of the hangars. Next, Uhse went to the colonel commanding the base and pleaded for some fuel. He permitted it, and after quickly familiarizing herself with the twin-engine plane while it was being fueled, loaded her son, his nanny, her mechanic friend, and also 2 wounded German soldiers aboard, and took off, heading northwest. Flying northwest at low altitude, she dodged some Soviet flak and roving fighters before landing at Lech, 30 kilometers west of Flensburg in northern Germany. Her aviation career now over, Uhse settled in Flensburg after the war and entered business. She created a chain of famous sex shops, which became very successful, making her a millionairess. In 1989, she received the Federal Cross of Merit from West Germany, and incredibly only learned to drive at the age of 75. Beate Uhse died in Switzerland in 2001 at the age of 81. Melitta von Stauffenberg and Beate Uhse were not the only female pilots to undertake daring end-of-war missions, another being the aforementioned Hanna Reitsch. But Reitsch's extraordinary Berlin mission will be the subject of a future video, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching, please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon, details in the description box below.